Help is just a click away with Shoreside Therapy's free 15-minute consultation. At Shoreside Therapies, they offer personalized therapy services that combine evidence-based techniques with genuine care and understanding. They provide various solutions to make the therapy process more accessible, including virtual appointments and assistance with insurance benefits. Their team of licensed therapists is dedicated to helping you build resilience and confidence while navigating life's challenges. Join Shoreside Therapies on your journey to finding inner peace and happiness. Go to shoresidetherapies.com for a free 15-minute consultation and discover the benefits of counseling. At Shoreside Therapies, again, shoresidetherapies.com, and schedule your free consultation right online. Welcome to the Wisconsin Wellness Podcast. I'm Laurie Groh, your host, mental health therapist, and practice owner. Each month, we'll showcase a central theme and provide weekly practical hacks, inspiring interviews, and valuable advice from wellness professionals. Our aim is to help you streamline your wellness and mental health journey. So let's start the show. Hi, welcome to the Wisconsin Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Laurie Groh. Today we have Julianne Manske Rollefson. Nailed it. She is a psychotherapist and a grief educator. She is a host of a wonderful podcast called The Art of Losing Podcast. Love that title. I'm talking with her today about grief and loss. And
Thank you so much, Laurie.
Me too. I love talking with you. And we're going to try to keep it somewhat short, but I know in past, me and you have talked for much longer. All right. I'm curious, looking a little bit of your background, and this is one of the first things that stood out to me when I looked up your information on LinkedIn, was that you went from working with Harley to Facebook into a therapist and now a podcaster. So I'm really curious, I'm sure our listeners are too, on how you went through that journey, because they're very different.
Yes, I get the Steve Jobs quote that he famously said, you can only connect the dots looking back. You can't connect them looking forward. And if you would have told me as a kid that I was going to be a grief therapist or a grief educator, I wouldn't have believed you. When I was younger, I wanted to be on the Mickey Mouse Club, or I wanted to be the next Barbara Walters. But I really have always been interested in people. That's the thread that has gone through from every different job I've had. I grew up in Michigan and moved to Chicago for my first job in media, got moved to LA for that job and got to work in LA for a while in entertainment PR, just all of the Beverly Hills world. And then got into the corporate space, but again, really still focused on people and communication have been the two things that have woven through. So I started training people in different communication skills, in public speaking skills, and through that work, got the job at Facebook. Facebook internally, I was working with people, I was training salespeople, and that work was really rewarding. It took me to London for a while. That same kind of work. So even when I was in corporations, I was always really interested in people, what makes them tick, how do you influence people, just all of the things that we now, as psychologists and therapists study about the brain. I was just doing it with a work lens. Right. Same thing when I moved to Milwaukee and was working at Harley Davidson. Also, it was a people development role. And so I was in charge of employee education there. So really training employees and really focused on manager development too. There was never anyone talking about grief and loss. Through all of the work I've done in leadership development and management development, I never taught anyone about grief and loss. I never was taught about grief and loss. And as now that's some of my passion, is bringing some of that education into the workplace, because when I became a griever, I wasn't educated in what that meant at all.
Yeah. As you were talking about that, I just kept thinking like, wow, yeah, you're right. You're right. I don't know if that is a part of a lot of businesses, having that, just the educational piece as far as what happens when somebody loses somebody, what would be some good things to have in place for them? That is one thing that just from my experience as a therapist, when a client does lose someone, work can be a double-edged sword. It can be a really good distraction, but it can also feel like you just have to do what you were doing, and who cares that you lost somebody important? And it just should be part of the fabric of a place you work with. You know so much about the
Right.
other people.
Yeah. The most interesting thing about it is that grief is going to hit 100% of us, right?
Right.
Anyone who does anything in life, grief is inherent in change, right? Any time that we experience a big change, there is loss that is part of it. And grief is the energy that is created in our bodies as an account of loss. So anytime we're losing something, it can be something that even outwardly looks positive. You're moving, you're getting promoted, you're moving to a new country, you're doing all of these sort of changes. But there's still loss of what used to be. Megan, my business partner, Megan Riordan Jarvis, and I often relate it or compare it to the fact that we all go through puberty training when we're in middle school, right?
Yep.
Our kids have to go and figure out what's going to happen to our bodies developmentally when we're going through
Yes.
puberty. And grief, in some similar ways, is a developmental thing that we go through, after which we are never the same. And yet, because we are not all educated in it, when people are going through it, it can be one of the most isolating things because no one knows if what they're experiencing is normal. No one knows
Yeah.
if what they're doing about it is good or bad, right? So people, on top of being grievers, are then wondering and judging themselves and feeling really isolated and alone in the experience, which doesn't have to be true. If everyone knew a little bit more about how we experience grief, about some of the things we can do as grievers, it wouldn't feel as lonely as it often does.
Oh my gosh, you're so right. Because it does. That is the single thing I hear most often, is that it feels so lonely and I feel so isolated. And talking about grief and loss in kind of a different way, I think is extremely helpful, because you're right. When we go through puberty, there is a loss of childhood. I can almost see a bit of this sadness about the loss of childhood. And when no one's looking, let's play a little pretend game. My best friend and I played Barbies secretly, I think until 8th grade, something like that, where we still wanted a piece of that childhood, but didn't really feel like that was acceptable. We'd get made fun of. Oh, somebody coming to the house, hide the Barbies.
Yes, you're hitting on something that's so important, especially this time of year, right? It's June, people are graduating, kids are going off to college in the fall, and everyone focuses on the good emotions around that. And they are. It's exciting. You're moving to another stage in life. And those kids are really scared,
Yeah.
and those parents are really sad, and all of these other things accompany it. And that's grief. And we just don't acknowledge it in that way. And so, just like you with your Barbies, you feel like it's something that you need to hide or even can be shameful in, because we don't have rituals of how to experience those losses or really honor those losses. We don't have the language on how to talk about it in terms of loss.
Yeah, that is coming up for a lot of people with transitioning to college. That's definitely another time in my life and other people's lives where it is all positive. People only talk about the positive things, even thinking about some of the questions people ask. Are you excited? It's funny because I will ask the opposite. Are you feeling a little nervous, or how are you feeling? And give some options with that question, because I know people aren't, it's not even being asked. And so then when somebody's experiencing, usually on average, it's about 6 months of being homesick, they think that they're really alone and everybody else is having fun and living it up. And I just miss being home.
It's these assumptions that we make. And you used the word homesickness. And recently I was speaking with grief expert Lisa Kiefhofer, who talks about grief in terms of homesickness and how those things can be so related. And that really hit home for me, because if you have something that you loved that you took comfort in that is now gone, it does feel like there's some longing for this sense of home that wasn't there. Even you and your Barbies or kids who are going off to college, there's that sense of longing and homesickness that occurs. And again, once people hear that other people feel that way, they don't feel so alone in that feeling. But the number one thing that keeps me really moving and driving forward in this work is that whenever I have conversations with people about grief, they're learning something new about it, which tells me that we do not know how to talk about this, how to deal with it. Let's start with the 5 stages of grief, right? So most of us have heard of the 5 stages of grief. They come from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She was a doctor. She used to sit with dying people, and she was the first person to sit with dying people, to study them. And those 5 stages of grief were actually the 5 stages that people go through as they're dying, which makes a lot of sense when you think about it, right? Because when you're dying, you're doing things, you're angry, you're in denial, you're bargaining, right? And you come to potentially acceptance in the end. They took those 5 stages and put them on grievers because we didn't really have anything for grievers. So they said, I think this might work for grief too. And the truth is it doesn't. What those 5 stages are, sure, you might feel anger. You might get to acceptance at some point. But what it does is usually make grievers feel like they're doing something wrong if they don't go through those 5, if they don't do it in the order, when actually they're just emotions and different things you might be feeling at different times. But it also doesn't give grievers anything to do, right?
Yes.
So it's like, all right, I'm in this stage of feeling anger. That's not helpful, right? Well, but not helpful. So again, the work that Megan and I are doing is really trying to offer something new, right? Offer something based on all of our experience, based on neuroscience and bioscience and everything that we know about grief and how it shows up in our brains and our bodies and our souls. Here are some things we can offer.
Could you share with the listeners who Megan is?
Sure. So Megan Riordan-Jarvis is a grief expert. She is also a psychotherapist specializing in trauma, grief, and loss. Megan and I found each other through social media. As I was going through the master's program in counseling psychology, training to become a therapist, what I found quickly is that most of those master's programs do not have anything about grief and loss. There is no class you need to take about grief and loss, which was really surprising to me as a griever who assumes that if I go to a therapist, they have some sort of training in this, right? I started putting together my own grief education program, and that involved reading a lot of books, listening to a lot of podcasts. And one of the best podcasts I found was called Grief is My Side Hustle. And it's hosted by Megan Riordan-Jarvis. And I learned a lot because she was both a griever. She had lost her parents just as I had. And she was a psychotherapist with years and years of experience. So she was able to join that personal and professional in a way that was really helpful to me. So at some point, she reached out on Instagram and said, I'm looking for someone to help with some of this grief work. And it was a match made in social media heaven. And this was about 2 years ago. We clicked and found a way to bring my business background together with her clinical background so that we can bring grief education to grievers, to workplaces, to clinicians. That's what we're passionate about, is making it so that the grief, helping to shift this culture so that people aren't leaning on these 5 stages of grief anymore, so that people aren't just sitting in their houses thinking that they're doing grief wrong.
Oh my gosh, I had goosebumps hearing that story. Does it almost feel like your parents pushed you together?
You know what? We've never talked about it in those terms. I don't pretend to know what happens on the other side. And I love that idea that maybe our moms got together and made it happen. I smile with tears in my eyes, which is one of my favorite dual emotions.
Yeah, just sometimes I don't know either. I do love to explore that area, and I do find it fascinating just to think about and wonder. One of the things about human experience is, to me, that we have that ability to wonder. And there are a lot of things that aren't explained. And sometimes the coincidences are big that you almost have to be like, I wonder.
the people I like working with the most are people who really like exploring that wonder, like exploring more of the spiritual, existential side, because none of us knows life is hard. And whatever people find from a spiritual standpoint that can help and bring comfort, none of us know, right? And so if there's
Right.
something that's helpful and brings comfort, I really like exploring that with people because I've seen what a difference it can make. And I've also seen that grief can really kick out the worldview that we had in place. It can
Mm-hmm.
really shake some of those foundations of faith, of our trust in the world. And so often grief leads to much more of those exploration of the deeper topic in life.
Yeah, yeah, that is definitely my experience as well of somebody feeling as though everything is upside down. What they thought they believed, they don't. And so there's that opportunity. It doesn't feel like an opportunity at the time, but an opportunity to spend some time within and think and wonder and consider and possibly become more open to different ideas, whatever that is. Maybe that there is no spiritual peace. That's okay too. I think, like you said, for that person, what smooths those rough edges? What gives some comfort? Again, we're all so different with what comforts us, but a lot of times it's connecting, at least for me, and that is also the thing I notice as an observer that's lacking when it comes to grief.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right, is that people are looking for that comfort. And a lot of times they actually get the opposite, which is really not anyone's fault. It goes back to us not being educated. But for those of you who have been through grief and really substantial loss, you've probably had people say things to you that are not helpful and maybe even, unfortunately, things that are harmful. And mostly is coming from a good place, but it's again, people not knowing what to say. So they'll offer something like, he or she is in a better place.
Mhm.
At least they're not suffering. At least you can have more kids. Pretty much anything that starts with at least, usually
Uh,
not helpful.
that's a good point.
When people say, what should I say? There's not a perfect thing to say, but I can
Yeah.
say some things that usually aren't helpful. And a lot of that, again, is putting kind of your spiritual beliefs on someone else.
Mm.
And so we have to be clear about, I liked what you said earlier about open questions can be the most helpful, right? They're not leading, they're not making assumption. As you said, it's not, are you excited to go to college? It's, what are you feeling,
Yeah.
right? How are you doing today? What is this experience like for you? So often people look to others, look to their support system for that support, and they don't know what they need or want, and the support people don't know what to do. And
Yeah.
so everyone is in this awful position where grievers don't know how to get support and supporters don't know how to give it.
Oh, 100%. When I was grieving the loss of my dad, it felt very strange. The people I was closest to, it was hard to ask them for what I might want, and I didn't really know what I wanted. And then when I would go places, sometimes people would say something, but I can tell you from my perspective, it was worse when someone didn't say anything. But that's different for everybody too.
Oftentimes when I'm talking to supporters, they'll say things like, I don't want to bring it up because
Mhm.
what if Lori's having a great day
Yeah.
and I ruin her day? And what I say, and this is true, and I promise you this is true, is that by bringing up your dad, you're thinking about him anyway, right?
Yeah.
Especially in early grief. You're not going to bring him up and it's something that you're not aware of. It's something that you're carrying. And so actually someone bringing it up makes you feel a lot less alone in that experience. So I always tell people, say the person's name. If you have a memory of that person, that can be some of the most helpful things, right? Because we're not going to get more memories. So people sharing memories they have is a way to continue that bond with the person. And that's the other piece of education I really try hard to do is there's a grief theory called continuing bonds. Where it comes from, actually, if we go back, and Lori, you'll appreciate this, we're going to go back to Sigmund Freud for a second.
Ooh.
Freud, in 1917, wrote a book called On Mourning and Melancholia. And this was the book that kind of said, in his mind, he said, in order to get through grief, you have to detach those attachments we have. So I had an attachment to my parents. I have to detach, and that's the only way that I can move on without falling into melancholia, which is what we would define as complicated grief. And so he says in his studies and all that he had seen, he thought that the best way to move forward would be to detach from those bonds. Now, what a lot of people don't know, and it's one of my favorite things to share with people, is that in my research I found, so that was 1917. In 1920, Freud lost his daughter, Sophie. His daughter died. He then wrote letters that showed that he actually really changed his mind on this. He wrote letters to his friends that said, actually, grief is a way of holding on to love, so it's better not to let go of it. And so, unfortunately, on mourning and melancholia and moving on and detaching is what continued out into the world. These other things weren't published or publicized, but in more recent times, in the last couple decades, the grief theory that is most prominent is called continuing bonds. And it speaks to what Freud learned once he experienced loss, is that actually what we want to do is continue that relationship in a different way. So it's going to look different. But whenever I talk to grievers about continuing bonds, they nod just like you are. Sense, right? It makes sense to continue to have this person in your life. It's just going to look different. I really, for myself, I do this and I help grievers to try to figure out what are the new ways that this relationship can show up in your life? What are the new ways that you can continue to bring this person along with you? And that can look on more of a grand scale, like something like Dia de los Muertos, which is the beautiful Mexican celebration of honoring the dead. And it can look like really little things. Like when I look across my office, I have Better Homes and Gardens magazine here in my basket for my clients. And it's not because I love that magazine. It's because it's something that my mom and I used to pass back and forth to each other. And so when I look at it, it reminds me of her. And it's a way of continuing to bring her into my life. And we can all do that. And I think it's always really helpful for people to know you don't have to move on. You're not doing it wrong if you continue to think about that person. That's actually the most healthy thing that you can do to move forward with grief.
Yeah, I completely agree. There's still conversations. There are, if I'm proud of something, I might not even be telling anyone, but I'll be telling my dad in my mind because I can actually somewhat imagine his response. And he had some very distinct ways of responding. And so usually positive. But yes, it doesn't just stop. I think the pain shifts for me anyways. It's not as sharp, but it's still like a longing, but that's what keeps me from feeling that in such a devastating way, is that ability to at least express something towards him.
And as you said, you often hold that person in your heart in such a way that you know how they would respond. You're able to have that conversation. And one of my favorite grief podcasts is Anderson Cooper's podcast. It's called All There Is. I highly recommend it. He's grappling with his own grief, but he had a really interesting episode where people talked about how that relationship can actually continue to change, right? It can even get better in death sometimes because that person's not there to talk back to you. It can get better as you, right? So I would say my relationship with my mom continues to change because I am a mother now. I was not a mother when she was alive. And, those motherless mothers who are in that same situation get what I'm saying because all of a sudden I have a very different relationship to who she was as my mother. And so that relationship looks different. She's not here anymore, but the way that I relate to her continues to evolve and even grow just deeper in appreciation for all that she did as I get more understanding. It can be comforting for people to know that relationship is still a living thing. You can learn from it. You can grow through it. You can ask for the advice, as you're saying. And sometimes people will say, is that bad? Does that mean I'm stuck in my grief if I'm still talking to this person, if I'm still writing letters to them on every birthday? Absolutely not. That shows that you are healthily integrating that loss into your life.
Yeah, that is so important for people to take away. That piece is a healthy thing to do and a really nurturing thing to do. And yes, I agree with you on it changing because you're right. I'm in a very different situation as well without my dad. And I just think about what would he say with 4 kids and having the twins? What would he really be saying and experiencing? Yeah. And so that's pretty cool. And I can also see that parenting connection too of what that, even some of the negative things. Oh, that makes sense on why he was cranky sometimes.
Absolutely,
I get it a
right?
little
Yeah,
bit now.
it's okay to have all of it. Grief emotions aren't all one thing, right? Often
Right.
people look at someone and say, "You're not sad, you're not grieving." It's like a grieving person might be very angry. They might be a lot of different things. It doesn't need to look one way. And I think one thing that we learn as we go through life, but I think becomes even more magnified as grievers, is that we are often holding more than one emotion at one time. We are often holding more than one emotion. And I think that getting comfortable with that opens up much more richness in life. It doesn't need to look one way. Talking about Mother's Day, Father's Day in June, all of these days, that graduation, as we were talking about, you might be excited and you might be sad. I'm sad that she's not there, and I'm still really happy that it's happening. I got married 3 or 4 months after my mom died, right? And it was a really joyous day, which isn't to say that I wasn't sad that she wasn't there. All of those things were happening. And I think as therapists, when we work with grievers, the more we can really just increase people's comfort level with holding all of those emotions and knowing that any emotion is just energetically going to move through us, right? Nothing's going to be there forever. Oftentimes when I work with grievers, they're so scared to cry or to get sad because people say, if I start crying, I'm never going to stop.
Yeah.
And developing that comfort in letting those emotions in and then learning that every emotion is going to pass.
Yes. Sometimes you don't know which one, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm curious, when you were talking about the 5 stages of grief, I had a sense that wasn't quite nailing it for the grief process. And so that feels really validating that it's not quite it, and how it can feel like I need to go through this stage, then that stage, or if I'm not angry, then I'm not grieving correctly. I'm curious a bit before our time's up, if you could share a bit about there's an acronym that you use.
Yeah, there is. And so again, what Megan and I want to be able to offer is something that's more helpful than the 5 stages, right? It hasn't given us what we need. And so we spent a long time putting together, again, she took all of her clinical expertise. We did a ton of research on what actually does work. And now we have something that we can offer grievers, support people and clinicians who are helping grievers. And we call it the Grief Mentor method. So mentor is an acronym. And it is not linear. Although if you were to see the 6 words in a line, it looks linear, but we want to think of it more as almost like a Trivial Pursuit circle that you're going to try to get all of the pieces into. And it's 6 things that as you integrate and grow into becoming a griever, have been scientifically proven, but also just anecdotally we know to be true, can be helpful. So again, it's MENTOR. The M stands for mindfulness. This is about being present to the current moment. Often in grief, we are either thinking about the past, we might be ruminating on what we did wrong, what we wish would have happened. We're thinking about the future. My mom and dad aren't going to be here to experience all these things. Getting a mindful practice, it doesn't need to look like meditation. It can look like a bunch of different things, but building a mindful practice can really help you in being in the current moment, which helps you to, as we've been talking about, take those emotions as they come, right? And to learn how to move through them and integrate. So mindfulness, it can look like a walking mindfulness. Oftentimes people say, I'm not good at meditating. It can look a lot of different ways, but it's the first piece, and that you have to learn to be with what is in the present. And then the next stage is energy. Once you are mindful to what's there, you look at, where is my energy currently? A lot of times people are going to offer a one size fits all. So they'll say, if you want to do self-care, go take a bubble bath, right? That's helpful if you're trying to bring your energy down, right? But it's not helpful if you haven't been able to get out of bed for a week. Then you need to bring your energy back up, right? All about the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems that we're trying to balance. And so it's not a one size fits all. checking in and saying, where is my energy? And how can I get some equilibrium? What interventions can I use when I find that I'm either at the really high end of energy and I need to be able to bring that down, or I'm way down here, which happens often in grief, where you feel that thing that feels like depression? What are some ways that we can bring that energy up? So there are tools and interventions there as well. The N is for nourishment. This is somewhat about what you're putting into your body. So that is going to help with your energy, but it's also about all of the different ways you nourish yourself. What are the ways that you can nourish your body, your mind, and your soul? So all of these have a lot of different things to try. And the thing with the mentor method is it's not prescriptive, it's experimental. So you say, hey, I think this might help. I'm going to give it a try. As a grief therapist, I cannot tell you what is going to be most helpful, but I can offer you what I know has helped other people, and it might be helpful, or you might need to try the next thing. So translate the T. Now, this is the part that you and I do. This is when people come and tell us their story, right? So it's translating the experience you've had and making some sort of narrative sense out of it, right? So for some people, this is journaling. For some people, it's talk therapy. As a grief therapist, I don't think therapy is the one and only way to get through grief, right? But it's one way that you can start to translate and tell your story in a way that's helpful and doesn't keep you stuck in it. So again, it can look like journaling. It can look like talking to a trusted friend. It can look like being in a grief support group. There are a lot of different ways that can look. The next one is outside. As it's getting warmer here in Milwaukee, I love this one. There is a lot of bioscience that is actually really helpful to get sunlight, particularly before 11 a.m. So some of this is about actually getting outside in nature. Sometimes what you're looking for is not going to be what you get necessarily just from your partner or from your close friend. So this is where you might look outside this to a support system, to something like the dinner party, which is just where a bunch of grievers gather together and share their experiences. But you might need to look outside to get a support system beyond what you currently have. And the last one is R, and this is ritual and rest. So ritual, talked about this as well. Is there a piece of music that you play when you think about your person? Is there something that you do to commemorate their death date or their birthday? These rituals can be really important. And it's something that if you're not part of some sort of religious community, you might not have or know where to start. But knowing and giving people permission to create their own ritual that in a way that's most helpful to them. And again, that's a trial and error thing. What you try first might not be the right thing, but usually if you keep going, you'll find something that's right for you. And the second part of R is rest. Everything we're talking about as a griever, you are putting your body and mind and spirit through a lot, right? It's novel, it's new. And just like anything new that we're learning, it's exhausting, right? Yeah. We compare it to like the first time you took your kid to daycare and you might have only taken them for 3 hours, right? And they come home, lay on the couch the rest of the day, need water, because all of a sudden they were stimulated in completely new ways. Yeah. They were asked to do completely new things. All our brain wants is to do the same thing over and over. It makes it a lot easier. Grieving is new. It's learning. It's a learning process. Your brain is needing to learn the world without that person in it anymore, or without that thing or that dream in it anymore. And so we need rest. We just need rest in a different way.
Just thinking about that, it makes a lot of sense with the rest piece of how your brain is actually functioning and needing to rewire, and how exhausting that can feel. Like you said with the rituals too, I feel like that's one of the most important things that we do for my dad is his favorite drink was Drambuie. And so on his birthday, we all have a drink. I don't know if anyone really finishes it because we wish he had picked, I don't know, an iced tea, maybe, I don't know, something. But it is that idea of taking pictures of ourselves and feeling connected, even though we're not in the same place. There's always something funny and connective about that experience.
I love that. For my dad, it was pina coladas. He made pina coladas even in the winter months in Michigan. So we will toast with a pina colada. And I do want to say with the ritual piece, we have been talking a lot about death loss, but this can be for any kind of loss, right? It can be for a loss of a relationship, a divorce. It can be for anything that you're going through. It can be a loss of a job. Sometimes just finding a ritual to mark that can be really helpful. And so if you're a griever and you're thinking, I'm grieving something, I might be grieving an estrangement, right? There are a lot of different things we can grieve. You just have to, again, follow your intuition and get creative about what that looks like.
Great point, because that does occur a lot for people, loss of relationship, ending of a relationship, where there's not necessarily something that's there already, especially with divorce. That's one thing I hear as well of, yeah, there's all these parties, all these things surrounding the actual marriage. But when we get divorced, here's all the paperwork, go to court potentially, and then goodbye. And that doesn't feel great.
Loss of a job. It's like you've been doing the same thing for 10 years, been seeing the same people, been going the same place. When that's not there anymore, there is huge grief associated. You didn't love every aspect of your job, right? It's just that big of a change, and finding a way to acknowledge and mark it. And some of that, again, for some people, coming in and talk therapy could be a huge part of it, of just getting it out of your head. But it can look a lot of different ways. Like I said, even as a therapist, therapy is not always the one size fits all answer. There are a lot of different things you can do.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Julianne. I really enjoyed our talk today. I would love to have you back. We're going to be doing a month on divorce, and that might be a really great thing to have you on to talk a little bit about what are some things people could do during that time, because that can be so difficult for people.
I would love to. Laurie, as you said, like I could talk to you for hours every time.
That sounds great. Then I'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you for joining us today on the Wisconsin Wellness Podcast. Remember, your well-being is a priority, and we're here to help support you every step of the way. If you've enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast for more inspiring content on health and wellness. You can also join our Facebook group to connect with Wisconsin wellness providers by clicking the link in our show notes. Take care of yourself, and remember that your well-being is a journey, not a destination. We look forward to you joining us again next time on the Wisconsin Wellness Podcast. Until then, stay well and stay inspired.